2020.
Yes, no problem. I'm here.
What time there, Miss?
It's around 10. So
Oh,
10:01 exactly in the Netherlands.
okay.
How
The
many
weather?
participants we are expecting, Mbak Lely?
60.
Oh, 60. That's
Online
quite a
and
lot.
offline. Before 20 participants went to Bali, Mbak, and then most of them also online or off the summer course. Not all the participants follow the offline.
Okay. Wow, very nice to Bali.
Yeah, went to Bali
Special.
3 days.
Nice. Hope you all enjoy the trip. Do they also have classes before this, Mbak Lely?
Yeah, in the morning from Sydney University, Mbak.
Oh, very nice. And what was that about?
About the I forget. Wait. Okay, about Mister. Wait, Mbak. Profesor Dr. Indra Mahlia, University of Technology. Okay. Okay, about the okay, I cannot open the slide, Mbak.
It's okay. I will ask the participants as well about their expected expectation of this lecture, because I'm curious about what they have learned so far.
Okay, maybe okay. The participant can share your experience during this summer course. Maybe okay, I will ask to the Miss Madarana or Irene. Okay, Irene. Miss Irene, can you share about the summer course?
For my opinion, so basically this summer course is about the carbon footprint. So before we go into the Bali, we have been exposed by the lectures about how the waste management and the waste problem in Bali and the carbon footprint problem contribute to the economy. Yeah, so and then we have been seen to Triyanti how the people manage the organic and inorganic waste. And
Right.
yeah, yeah, and moving to the Bali, and we also see that in the tourist place, basically is full of people, and some of them quite not aware about the environment issue. And the Bali people also try to practice the waste management practice, like they will put the dustbin with organic and inorganic dustbin for people to throw the waste. And yeah, that's for me.
Okay, that's all, Miss Annisa.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's nice to hear that you went to the community then to learn about how they practice waste management. I think it's very interesting to know more about these local activities in Bali.
Yeah.
Okay, Miss, I think that we will start.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
We have a nice number of participants.
Yeah, 28, right?
29 right now.
Yeah,
but,
29.
yeah, excluding me, then it's 28.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Okay, I will.
Start?
Yeah, I will. Wait, I think that I will start first, Miss.
Sounds good. Yeah.
As a moderator, I want to introduce you to the participant first. Okay, good afternoon everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for Dr. Annisa Triyanti. You have joined our ESL summer course today, and thank you for the all participants. And before Miss Annisa start to deliver the material, I would like to introduce you all who is the Dr. Annisa Triyanti. She is an assistant professor of disaster and climate risk governance for sustainability at the environmental governance group Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development, Utrecht University, Netherlands. She holds a PhD degree from the IISSR, Governance and Inclusive Development, Universiteit van Amsterdam, Netherlands. She graduated from Master Program on Planning and Management of Coastal Area and Watershed, Faculty of Geography, University Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta, Indonesia, and Master Program for Technology of Natural Resource Management, Color University of Applied Science, Germany. Her expertise Delta Coastal Management, Governance, Disaster and Climate Risk, Adaptation, Ecosystem-Based Adaptation, Transdisciplinary Science and Collaboration, and Global South. Okay, yeah, I think that's so very outstanding speaker today. I'm happy to see to meet the Miss Annisa, and then today you will have 45 minutes, Mbak, to share your material, and then after that there is 30 minutes to Q&A, and then time is yours, Mbak.
Thank you so much, Mbak Lely, for a very nice introduction. I hope that you can see my slides now presented on the screen. If not, please let me know. Give me a sign that you can see it now.
Yeah, clear, Mbak.
See.
Great. Yeah, so yeah, you can call me Annisa. I'm a lecturer and also researcher at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development, as Mbak Lely already introduced me before. So today I'm going to discuss about the topic of climate and disaster risk governance, lesson learned and way forward. I know that the whole topic of this summer course is more about carbon footprint, but I think I would like to give insights from my own expertise from the adaptation side as well. So you have also a bigger and more complete picture about climate issues in the world. Of course, my expertise is more on Asia and also on Indonesia in general. So I think you will learn more also in this lecture about case study in Indonesia. And I hope that this lecture would be, well, this session would be much more interactive, because I would like to know more also about your perspectives on this issue and also to learn from you. Yeah, so in this session, there are 4 parts that I would like to present to you. The first one is the state of the art of the climate, about global warming, anthropogenic causes, and also impact. The second one is on key concepts, especially related to disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, governance, and also some global frameworks that are related to disaster and climate risk. And then I will present to you the illustrative case study of governing climate and disaster risk in northern Central Java area, in Semarang and Demak area. And then we can discuss about some lessons learned and reflect from all of these insights that we've learned from this session. But first of all, I would like to invite you to go to wooclub.com. So you can access this platform from your laptop or from your phone. You can scan this QR code with your camera, or just go to wooclub.com and enter the event code. Meanwhile, I will stop sharing here, and you will see the how to participate again in the next screen. So if you can bear with me for a moment. One moment. Yes, this one. Share. So yes, so if you can go here, and then I can see also how many people joining on this little box here. So 2 people are already joining. It's a way for me to also get to know you in a short time frame, because we don't have unlimited time. Yes, so 5 people are joining. We can wait for 1 or 2 minutes for other people to join. 7 people, 8.
Mbak Nisa, can I follow, right?
Yes, please go ahead. Everyone
Thank
is
you.
invited. Okay, I'll just go to the next slide, but still, I mean, anyone can join. You still can see the code on the next slide as well. So my question, first question, where do you come from? So maybe you can mention your country. Indonesia, Malaysia. Okay, Indonesia and Malaysia. Do we expect any other participants, Mbak Lely, from other countries today?
Yes, there is Pakistan also.
Okay,
Great.
Yeah, so it means that I can use some of bahasa that maybe colleagues from Malaysia would understand. So it doesn't have to be fully in English. And I think, I mean, if you want to ask question or clarification in bahasa, please go ahead. There's no issue. All right, so mostly from Indonesia and Malaysia. Please also let me know in the chat if you come from other countries. And can you tell me your educational level? So bachelor, master, PhD, so quite diverse. Right. Good. So I'm moving to the next question. So what is your disciplinary background? I mean, for example, I'm a human geographer. I identify myself as a human geographer. Maybe some other people would be more, I mean, it can be social scientists as well. So whatever you prefer to identify yourself. Maybe people from medicine. I heard from Mbak Melani. Management, economy, environmentalist and economist. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's organized by ESL, right, Baleli? So I think economy would be the main background.
Yeah, Mbak, betul.
Okay, next. So what have you learned so far in this summer course? I mean, you don't have to fill in a full sentence, but then you can also give me some keywords. It's nice to know and to adjust also the way I present my material. So culture aspect, environmental and economics. Okay. Right. Waste management, yeah, but Irene already mentioned also before. Low carbon tourism, climate change and SDGs. So very nice. I will also cover it a bit. Tourism, important sector also when we talk about carbon footprint. Agricultural, GHG. Okay, it's good to hear that you've already covered the process of climate change. So I can maybe skip it, or I don't have to explain it in a more detailed way, let's say. Awareness about climate change, also very interesting to know and very important. If we are self-aware, then we can also make other people aware about issues of climate change. Do we have how to make a reflective summary? So it's more of a methodological lessons, let's say. That's very nice. All right, so I think I get to know you a bit more also on what you've learned. Bali, one last input. So you learn about Bali. It's a very nice place to visit, of course, and to learn. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing here and I will share my slides again. Yeah. So yeah, as I said before, the first part of this session would be about state of the art of the climate. I think most of you already know a lot about the impact of climate change, that we are now in a very scary period, scary moment as human to live in this world. We experience adverse impact from human caused climate change that will be continuously intensify. And it will affect our future generation as well. So IPCC in their latest AR6 report produced this figure showing that if we don't actually do anything about reducing our emission and also adapt to climate change, there would be a danger to our future generation as the world getting more and more warmer, and we will expect more and more impact to humanities due to climate change. We'll discuss about these impacts later on. And we all know that the increasing emissions are mostly caused by humans, so it's anthropogenic. And these are coming from three main human sources, like industrial processes, land use changes, and also fossil fuel combustion. There are other activities of human that produce other greenhouse gases as well. And we all know about this greenhouse effects that really determine the process of acceleration of climate change, where the greenhouse gases actually make layers and it traps the heat in Earth, which increase the temperature of the Earth. I think it's a common knowledge about climate change process. Yeah, and the latest report of IPCC also shows differentiation in terms of production of emissions. It's very important aspect to understand that the emissions are produced and distributed unevenly among different regions. So you can see from this figure, like the most contributions come from international shipping, from a region like Australia, Japan, and New Zealand, and then after that, Middle East. We see our region here, Southeast Asia and Pacific, to be in the middle contribution level. And it's very important to know this because it's about also how we can partner together with other countries and making sure that we cover the justice aspect about who's supposed to reduce emission more and how to help developing countries, for example, to reduce emission. And the most alarming figure right now is that from since the 1850s and 1900, human activities are responsible for approximately 1.1 degree Celsius warming. So the Paris Agreement has set already the target of not exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming in 2030. But of course, this is still up to us to make a decision. Because of this accelerating increasing of warming, we have to do things right now to make sure that we can achieve the target. Yeah, so it's the impact of climate change is amplified. I mean, and also there's a process towards the impact itself. Like we know that the sun is a source of heat, and with the greenhouse gases trapping the escaping of the heat, the more increase in temperature of the world will melt glaciers, for example, increase sea level, and also the impact of extreme weathers like more precipitation in one part of the world and droughts in other part of the world. It will affect biodiversity, and of course it will affect human. Take an example of how we produce our food. We are very dependent, our agricultural system is very dependent on weather. So when weather is actually more uncertain, then it means that we are less resilient to agricultural production and impact of climate change. And to not forget that the people who are the most vulnerable are people with a social, low level of social income, people who are living in a very vulnerable areas like small islands, developing states, for example. So it's very important for us to think about these different layers of effort to make sure that we include also the justice elements to it. I mentioned about the different sources of carbon, but I will be unfolding more of these activities. So basically the way we generate our powers increase the emission, how we manufacture goods, and also activities like cutting down forests for changing landscapes, the way we use and also produce means of transportation and also food. So it brings back to the question about how we wanted to reorganize our lives with this goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius in mind. So how we can limit the emissions. And there are different ways. I think you've learned about waste management, for example, one way to do it. And these ways are differentiated in different scales, the things that you can do yourself in your own life, but also it's about regional, national, and global efforts as well. And this will lead to the concept of governance that I will discuss about in the next slides. Right, so Asia is the most exposed region to climate change. I think most of us knows that it comprises 70% of the world population. Also in terms of social, economical, and political vulnerabilities, Asia is quite in a higher rate than other countries, other regions, I mean. It is projected that the high-end projection of sea level rise by 2100 could be 2.9 meter higher than pre-industrial level. It potentially will affect 150 to 250 million people with assets worth of 6,500 until 9,000 billion US will be lost. And of course, Asia is a biodiversity hotspot. So climate change will actually threaten this biodiversity, and some of the species that are important for our ecosystem will be lost as well. Yeah, this is the more kind of detailed picture I took from the AR6 IPCC report about how climate change will contribute to more damaged infrastructure in Asia, loss of biodiversity, coral bleaching, decline in coastal fisheries, food insecurity, and also water insecurity. So this is a nice figure for you to also maybe look at to see how climate change actually affects regions differently. And I think for issues like global framework development, etc., it's very important, because then policies can be made more focused on certain vulnerable or the more threatened regions like Asia and Africa. Just to position also this session, I think, again, because of the topic is carbon footprint, perhaps you discuss more also about the mitigation, so action to reduce emission that cause climate change. Waste management is one of the local practices that is under this mitigation. It can also be somehow adaptation, but it depends on the context, of course. But in this session, I would be much more focusing on the adaptation side. So action to manage the risk of climate change impacts. Why? So both of them, don't get me wrong, both of them are very important. But maybe you can already see from the previous slides that I've shown you that in terms of producing emissions, it has been contributed much more by the global north, let's say. And the effect of climate change, like sea level rise, flooding, extreme weather events, unfortunately, the global south or developing countries are the one who has to bear with it. So it's about how we adapt to climate change impacts that are happening in our lives, like day-to-day basis. It's a matter of survival in my point of view. So it's about disaster management, also about business continuity, about flood protection, infrastructure upgrades. And of course, this session is about governance, so how we human can deal and structure ourselves to have a better adaptation measures. So key concepts on disaster risk. My question is, what is a disaster? So it's, again, links to this impact of climate change to extreme weather events. So I would like to actually open the floor, Mbak Laili, so if you can also help me a bit to ask the participants about their viewpoint on disasters. Well, what is a disaster? If someone wants to open their mic and share their thoughts.
Okay, guys. Okay, what is a disaster? Okay, I think that's I will ask. Okay, Kalawa Ega Chandra. Kalawa, hello. Okay.
Kalawa there, or maybe someone, just anyone who wants to share. I mean, you can also raise your hands and
just raise your hand, guys. Okay, if you want to answer, what is a disaster? What your opinion about this question? Okay, maybe Tasni. Okay, maybe Miss Tasni. What is a disaster? Yeah, Miss Tasnim.
Hello,
Yeah.
hi.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, disaster is about something contribute to the damage self. So and such as earthquake, hurricanes, flood, and also it came usually from the human impact also. That's that's all from me.
Thank you. Very interesting. I think, I mean, the word disaster, we use it in a day-to-day basis, right? It's a disaster when something's actually disrupting our lives or our situation.
Okay.
And yeah, Ashibu,
Yeah,
you want to
Simbu.
share something as well?
Yes. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Okay. I can say that a disaster is an event or fact that has an unfortunate consequences. Something that has an unfortunate consequences.
Yeah. That is also a very relevant answer, I think. Yeah, this is the answer, and we'll see how far you are with your answer and how it fits to this kind of a book definition of disaster. So disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society at any scales due to hazardous events, interacting with conditions of exposure, vulnerability, and capacity, leading to one or more of the following. So it can be about impact to human material, to economic and environmental losses. Yeah, so these are actually quite fitting to what you share with us. And Tasnim, I think it's interesting that you mentioned about the disaster is about human, so human produced disaster, and it links to this red box that I showed this in this story. So keep calm and repeat disasters are not natural. And this is something that I would like to also highlight here in this session. Like, we use the term natural disasters a lot, right? A flood is a natural disaster. Earthquake is natural disasters. But it doesn't actually produce a disaster if human can deal with it. So be careful with when you use the word of natural disaster, because indeed disasters are not natural. It's about how we cope with the events itself. Like you mentioned, one of the participants, I'm sorry, Ashikbu, mentioned that it's an event, but there are a chain of events also that produce a disaster. Yeah, so disaster, it can be like scientifically, there are different categorization is geophysical, hydrological, so earthquake is more of geophysical. I think I'm not going to that, also to keep in mind on the time. But you know what I mean now when we talk about disasters. Hazards in, okay, I'm going back here. So hazards is a source of disaster, right? And it can be natural. Let's say this climate change, sea level rise, it's hazards, but it doesn't come to a disaster when humans actually have the capacity. So what I wanted to share is this work that I was doing with a lot of experts on disaster and hazards studies. So we produced this new definition of hazards where we discuss about different categorization of hazards. And what is interesting that I wanted to share with you here is that naturally hazard is a natural processes, but then we realize that it can also comes from a societal processes such as conflict, for example, war, and it can also be coming from the biological type of hazards like COVID-19, for example. So this is just some insights. You can also check the publication here, and you can also download different kind of fact sheet about hazard and where they come from, and the process that evolving to disaster, let's say, from this report, if you're interested. Yeah, so climate change adaptation is another concept that I wanted to share. It's about the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate impact. It's how we human actually adjust our intervention, our way of life to facilitate these changes due to climate. Another figure I think that would kind of fit into this storyline is this global risk outlook from 2021 and also 2023. That risk, so climate risk, is about our perception. So in 2021, I think on the left figure, you can see like it's in the middle of the pandemic, and infectious disease is the most perceived risk by human here on the top, side by side with climate action failure. I think you remember maybe some arguments that COVID actually happens because of human, trying to deal too much or interact too much with nature, right? There's different theories of COVID, of course. And we don't know actually which one that actually the truth, let's say. But then the more scientific argument is that because of we pass the boundaries of nature, that it comes to us in this form of infectious disease of COVID. And then later on in 2023, when we are now actually out of the pandemic, there's this issue of war, Ukraine war, for example. And then our perception of risk goes to more of this energy supply crisis. That's mostly in Europe, I know. The cost of living crisis, about inflation, etc. So again, this risk perception is something that may be interesting to look at, especially when you talk about climate and disaster. You've heard about climate denial issues, like people who are not actually believing in climate, etc. So it's about increasing this awareness that climate change is really happening. So what are we going to do about it in the future? And this figure really shows that human minds only think about what is in front of them, like what they actually feel as human, as a risk to them at that time. But for climate, the issue is that sometimes the process and impacts is a bit more of a long term. If you're not living in small island states, for example, you wouldn't worry about sea level rise. So yeah, I think it's just interesting for us to understand this risk perception. An issue that I thought is interesting to learn also, link back to the COVID-19, that actually everything is interconnected. So when we talk about climate, we cannot only talking about climate, because it also links to other sectors, including health, including environment. There is this issue of compounding risk, that one risk actually interrelated with the other risk. So we have climate change, we have flooding, and at the same time, for example, we have COVID-19 situation. There was a case where in Jakarta, there was a flooding in the middle of the COVID-19. There was an issue of how they can organize shelter that are actually COVID-19, how do you call it, secure, let's say, that you can make sure that people are not really standing close to each other, living close to each other, etc. So yeah, it's a big lessons learned for us to understand about what risk and how we perceive risk, and when they merge with each other, how we can deal with them. Right, so yeah, we talk about climate change as an anthropogenic process, let's say. There is this word and also concept of the Anthropocene that I thought is interesting to mention. It's about that we are actually now in the era where human activities define the earth, define the world, let's say. Before, there is different eras that are more connected to geological epoch, let's say, but now it's about human. So I like this quote by, I think, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of United Nations. He said, we can shape our future. We are part of this story, and we are the first generation to realize the responsibility of human to actually deal with this. So this is a very, very interesting moment for us as humans to govern our world. Yeah, so again, I think then it comes the concept of governance, right? I already kind of teased it a bit. So what is governance? It can be quite a heavy word, let's say. I don't know how people from the economy define governance. Maybe it can be different from other fields as well. But for me, especially from the environmental governance point of view, it's more about the steering mechanism to reach collective goal. That's a simple way to define governance. So how we can structure ourselves, how we can use the power of human as an actor and institutions and all the rules that we make to reach a certain target. So of course, we're talking about adaptation or transformation to a sustainable world. It's about how we arrange the interaction, the structure, the actions, policy, measures, and it should lead to systemic institutional change. So it means that we govern ourselves to make sure that we are more flexible, we have increased capacity to anticipate future disaster and risk. We change our way of life, we transform our structure and system to achieve sustainable development. And one of the very important elements is technology and innovation. And with technology and innovation, it doesn't always have to be an innovation that is really hard innovation, but it can also be social or governance innovation. How we can radically change the way we interact with each other, how we can radically change the rules, for example, and laws to achieve more effective climate change adaptation. This is one of the most, I think, easiest to understand. There are different governance concepts, but the Earth system governance concept for me is really stand out here because it shows different layers of elements that are important when we talk about governance. It's about architecture and agency, so institution and actors. It can be individual actors, it can be community. So the question about who are the institution and actors. There's this element of democracy and power. It's about who can participate and has the power to influence. Issues of justice and allocation. Again, I teased it also a bit in the earlier storyline. So who has to bear the cost and receive benefits? Who isn't excluded? Issues of anticipation and imagination. So what will the future bring? And it's important for disaster and climate. It's about predict the future and how to deal with these changes that we will experience in the future. It's about adaptiveness and reflexivity. So how we can learn from past and current experience to better deal with the disaster and climate risk. This is paper by Birch et al. 2019. So you can also check there to know more about this concept. Global architecture. Of course, climate change is a global issue, disaster is a global issue, so there is this mechanism at the global level. The most relevant one is the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. It actually developed on the same year with SDGs and also Paris Agreement. It has 7 targets to achieve, to reduce mortality, number of affected people, economic loss, damage, and also increase DRR strategies, cooperation, and early warning system. So basically, the 7 target really what the world is trying to achieve in 2030. And so how it actually links with SDGs, I think that's also an interesting question. We know SDGs is mostly about the broader sustainable development kind of framework. And it actually include aspect of disaster and climate risk in the targets and goals and targets. But this figure shows a bit about the explicit linkages. For example, Target A in Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, talking about reducing number of deaths, and it really links to Goal 1 about no poverty. It's about increasing the kind of social capacity of community to deal with disaster. Also, the link between disaster climate and SDGs is reflected on Goal 13 on climate action. It's about how to increase number of countries who have already or will develop disaster risk reduction strategies and implement these strategies as well in line of the Paris Agreement and climate, and SDGs. So the actors, it's also a very important element of governance because actors decide, right? I mean, what kind of actions that they will use. It's very important to see or map different actors. For disasters is globally managed or under the UN system managed by the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction. There are also community, civil society, representation like from children and youth, from science, from NGOs like World Vision, but also this science representation that I thought very interesting to delve into, to see like how much science actually inform policy in terms of disaster risk reduction and also climate change adaptation. So for climate, I think you've known about IPCC. So IPCC is more of this science board that informs global policy on climate. For disaster is called Science Technology Advisory Group. Currently, there are different representation in different regions. And it's interesting to see how all of these actors actually work together and come to a negotiation, for example, to come up with certain strategies that will be adopted by different regions and countries. Right, so that's about the architecture, the concept, and also architecture of governance and disaster risk. Mbak Lely, can you remind me again about the time that we have left? I was wondering if you have time.
I think that, until 4, Mbak. 4 o'clock is okay.
So 4 o'clock means
Yes.
here, okay, then we have 13 minutes.
Yes.
That's not long. So I will just continue this with this part 3, but in the meantime, if you have any questions or you're curious about anything that I present to you, please just put it in the chat so then we can go back to it in the discussion section. Right, so what we've learned so far, we learned about the process of climate change a bit, more or less. The status, so the IPCC report impacts, talk about the sources of emissions. We move to focus on adaptation, and then we discuss disaster risk, we discuss global framework and concepts. So I wanted to make this more of a reality in the ground. So that's why I put this part 3 of case studies to make sure that we have better understanding how we can implement this concept, like all of these elements of governance, into a real life case studies. So this is a case of Semarang, Demak. Maybe Indonesian students, you know about this area, you visited this area. Semarang is one of the most, the biggest city in Java. Very strategic city also in terms of goods and transportation. There's a big port, urbanized city as well. But it has its challenges, especially when we talk about this more of a coastal region of Semarang. Of course, there's internal issues in Semarang city as well. But in this case, I would like to focus more on this interaction between cities and, well, urban and peri-urban of Demak. So again, I mentioned it's very strategic, where people live. Demak area especially, so 1.1 million people. It has its coastal ecosystems that really drives the local livelihood, like in terms of producing food, fish and agriculture. There are also fishers living in this area and also fishing in this area. But it experiencing increasing sea level rise. Erosion is a big issue in this area. Land subsidence, also due to this Semarang city with many buildings and housings and settlements built there, which actually drive this land subsidence. This big city also extract a lot of groundwater, so it's a combination of weight from the building, from development of the buildings and settlements, and an extraction of groundwaters that makes the land subside, especially in this peri-urban of the mark. So erosion, sea level rise, land subsidence, in combination, it produced a high risk of coastal flooding and land loss. One of the arguments also made by previous research about the unsustainable aquaculture, so opening the land for fish pond, that makes erosion rate level higher, let's say. So there's a big issues here that caused by this interaction of cities and urban and peri-urban. So the governance challenge, so there are different approaches already taken by government, by local communities, different actors, including international NGOs coming there to the area to actually try to restore mangroves. I think if some of you also learn environmental science, biology knows that mangroves have a lot of benefits as an ecosystem, of course, and also in terms of the surfaces to protect the areas from erosion, from flooding. And some efforts are done in terms of more hard infrastructure or a more kind of physical development, let's say, such as development of toll road that also contributes as a dam. But this mangroves restoration is a more of a green approach. The issues here is try to align these different approaches together. The international NGOs focusing more on this green approach. There's also this pressure of development from the infrastructural side, how to align these different approaches, how to also address the issue of social justice. So this more of infrastructure approach, like building dam, actually is more geared towards protecting the urban coastal cities, let's say, instead of the peri-urban. Meanwhile, the green approach is kind of perceived as the more like cheaper approach, using local community efforts, etc. So there's this issue of justice, right? I mean, who's supposed to be protected and with what? How much investment are actually put to protect the people living in these two different areas? Another issue is about accountability, so problem of fragmented governance systems. In Indonesia, I think maybe you know about this decentralized system that we have, national, we have provincial, we have also the more regional, local governance level, and they all have to work together. And sometimes it doesn't work because every level or even every institution have their own goal and their own means. So sometimes it works like this. It doesn't really actually addressing the real problems, especially at the local level. And another issue is legitimacy. It's a governance challenge that relates to how to actually include the right knowledge and who's supposed to actually make the decision. And in this case, I think local communities are the one who has more of this local knowledge, right? Because of this decentralized system, sometimes their knowledge are not being acknowledged, let's say, or not being considered as the main knowledge to be taken care of or to be used for dealing with governance challenges. But there is this governance opportunities that communities actually work together. There are different community groups working on mangrove restoration with or without this international NGO project. We can see it as opportunities because it's the way that local community govern themselves. And because of this very vulnerable state of the area, there are much more interests of projects, donors from international sources, for example, come to this area and make sure that they develop transformative projects. Yeah, so I think we can see it as opportunities to some extent. Of course, there are challenges to this project as well, as I mentioned in the previous slides. Right, so yeah, I think it's one of the reflection of the whole storyline. I will stop there then. It's about the normative issue. We discuss about climate, we discuss about how emission sources are actually unevenly distributed, how, for example, in the real case of Semarang Demak, that mostly people who are protected are located in the more strategic area like urban areas. So there is a clear issue of justice that we have to discuss more, I think, in the narrative of climate change. So the argument is that the world is changing, but the norms and values remain the same. So I introduce this logic of appropriateness, means that how it is appropriate to implement certain strategy, not only talking about consequences that leads to mostly about the narratives of economy, let's say how to actually build the economy. We have to revert back and actually think about how to actually save the people and build the people instead. And we sometimes forget about the political dilemmas of climate change. And in governance, politics is a very core to any of our human actions. So who gets to decide the future? Issues of climate colonialism, for example, there are a lot of international NGOs and donors coming to developing countries to help, let's say, help, quote unquote, the developing countries to deal with climate change. But we sometimes forgot about our own capability and capacity to deal with these issues ourselves, so with local knowledge and local institution. And then there's an issue about how to embed participatory approach, how we can involve marginalized and vulnerable communities, and think about intergenerational justice. So intergenerational justice means about how we can ensure that the next generation will actually not bearing the consequences of our action, our poor judgment and our poor governance. Right, so yes, these are maybe some points about that. Again, climate change disasters are anthropogenic problems. Disasters are not produced instantly, usually is a symptom of a larger complex problem. So climate and disaster risk governance is an essential aspect to reduce risk. And all the strategies that we're thinking about have to be designed based on the contextual condition of the location and people. And issues of social justice and political asymmetry should be put forward when we design governance strategies. So yeah, that's it, my presentation. I hope that you enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to the discussion with all of you. So I give the floor back to Mbak Lely.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Annisa. We have a lots of the knowledge, guys, and then it's time to Q&A. Okay, please, the participant, if you want to ask to Mbak Nisa, just raise hand and open your microphone. Hello, everyone.
It's a time day.
Andita, okay, I think that I have to.
You have to put yeah. Sure.
Andita, do you have a question?
So far, not yet, Miss.
Okay. Okay, and then Iren, I think that Iren, you always on cam, right?
Right.
Okay. I just want to ask because along the way we go to the Triyanti Triyanti village. When we passed by the place, we saw that the river is like quite dirty, and it reflects that the climate change also caused how to say I mean because the waste is not properly managed, so it's also contribute to the climate change, is it? And so can it possible to propose the solution? For example, maybe we can propose like mud ball, let the village do the mud ball and throw into the river, so that the river can be refresh and be clean again. Yeah, because
Is this a special case of Bali that you saw, Irana?
in Bogor.
Oh, in Bogor. Okay, so you saw that the river is quite polluted with waste, and you asked like what would be the solution to it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I think I mean there are different ways, right, for waste management. I mean the one that this is based on my I think I'm a layman's here. Maybe people from IPB who are actually studying about waste management can better tell you about this. But I think there are more and more efforts to actually locally or manage waste in a household level. And it's issue about awareness. If you talk about the Indonesian case, I think it's about habit and culture. I don't know. I mean, actually, I'm from Bogor. My father comes from Bogor. So people who are living in a river are used to just, especially if their house is actually not facing the river, but facing the other side, they see it as a place where you can just throw trash and waste, because they don't basically see it or face it, right? Or maybe because they see, even with houses that facing the rivers, usually think that they will be flushed away somewhere else, and that's fine. I mean, they don't have any issue with that. So it's issue about awareness. I think, like, what would be the impact to people if they keep doing that? And it's also about introducing different ways that can ways that can be easier for household level to manage their waste. And separating garbage is one thing that is very common in the Netherlands, in Europe, but I don't think it's quite common yet in Indonesia. Maybe in big city, but not in rural areas, for example. Because the point is that, okay, we separate waste, but then will it that be mixed again later in the next step? So I think it's a combination of awareness at the local level, household level, community level, but also about policy. So how we regionally and nationally manage waste. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but again, I think because it doesn't really relate to the expertise that I have, so I hope that it's just good enough to give some insights about the importance of local and household level of waste management.
Okay, how Iren? I think that the mindset, we have to change the mindset of the people.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, when you talk about climate change, usually like, climate change, but you don't really feel it, right? I mean,
I also realized that everyone is talking about climate change and global warming, disaster, but actually when come to practice, not really. Like, we're still talking about climate change, waste management, but we still using the plastic.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to understand the link because everything is interlinked. So that's also one of the arguments that I wanted to share in this session, actually. So the easiest, I think the easiest message is that we cannot confine ourselves in one particular box of climate change. No, but there is different interlink, between the changing of the climate, the perception of human and nature, how we conduct our day-to-day lives, that will actually, in the longer term, will reduce the impacts, reduce the emission, and reduce the impact of climate change. But when we talk with the community, it's not that easy. I mean, even us as a scientist, sometimes we're kind of focusing on our own field. Like, I'm a disaster person. But then with this kind of session, I think like, okay, I cannot just talk about disasters. I have to talk about the root causes of problems. So going back about Anthropocene, how we see ourselves as the dominant actor that changed the earth. We talk about the carbon emission. We talk about how then we adapt to our own mistakes, like climate change is caused by us. So everything is interconnected and sometimes difficult to explain, difficult to unfold.
Okay, Irene. Thank you, Mbak Annisa. Okay,
Welcome.
next.
Mbak Laini mungkin kalau misalnya yang lain mau
bahasa
pakai
Indonesia, ya.
bahasa.
Iya, mungkin malu ya Mbak ya. Oke. Ya,
I'm sure
Indonesia
you're
nanti.
good. You're good in English, but if you are more comfortable talking in bahasa, please do so.
Yeah, okay. Okay, please, maybe Iki, Muhammad Rizky, Iki, if you want to use bahasa ya, please.
Ayo kita diskusi.
Ayo. Oke, Hanin. Ya, Hanin silahkan. Ya, Hanin Nabila.
Oke, makasih kesempatannya. Aku mau nanya, mungkin mix ya bahasa Indonesia bahasa.
Enggak apa-apa.
Santai aja, nggak apa-apa.
Okay. I want to ask about is the use of electric vehicle, which are now starting to be encouraged, especially in Indonesia, in Jakarta. Is it the right step to reduce carbon emission? Remember that sumber dari listrik itu kan juga bukan sesuatu yang ramah lingkungan ya. Apakah penggunaan kendaraan listrik itu merupakan salah satu langkah yang tepat gitu untuk mengurangi emisi karbon dan mencegah climate change ini? Oke, gitu. Makasih.
Oke. Mbak Nisa kita tampung dulu ya. There is from Tresna Mutiara. Oke. Ya, Tresna.
Yeah, hello. Good evening.
Hello.
Good
Yeah,
evening.
can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, it was very interesting about the material because my background is not agricultural and something. So yeah, it boosts my awareness about the climate change and things. So ya, aku mau sedikit ini aja sih, sharing. So I've been live in Natuna Island for 2 years. Yeah, so Natuna Island is one of city, I think, in Kepulauan Riau. So it's near with Brunei and then Malaysia, of course. So I think the most important thing about this issue is the awareness of the society. Karena di sana itu orang-orang nggak ada waste managementnya, so they mereka tuh buang sampah itu dengan cara dibakar kan. So simple aja gitu. So mereka beneran kayak terisolasi di satu wilayah, and then mereka juga tidak punya awareness untuk itu lah ya, untuk bagaimana sih caranya untuk buang sampah dan mengelolanya itu, karena so simply they burn and then it's like a daily activity of the society. So ya, aku juga agak kaget ketika ke sana, like I'm back to 2000, tahun 2000-an. So it's like a rule, and then because this topic is about the governance, I think maybe apakah mungkin hal itu tuh sebenarnya karena governance-nya juga nggak punya awareness tentang hal ini. Karena because maybe kalau di kota kita bisa banyak banget campaign dan lain-lain, tapi ketika di sana itu benar Apakah karena governance-nya yang nggak fokus on that issue or something? Ya, aku cuma pengen discuss aja about that because I've been live 2 years and then it's very like somewhere unknown in the world. Thank you.
Okay, Mbak Tresna. Okay, Mbak Annisa, because the time ya Mbak, the limits. Okay, I think that please answer Mbak from Hanin and then from Tresna.
Yeah. So terima kasih Hanin. Thank you Hanin for the question. So it's about EV. Again, I'm not an expert in energy transition, but I think you have a right mindset there. It's also about the source of energy, right? I mean, first of all, I think it's good to just do whatever we can do to reduce emissions. So it's a time for being very radical in different ways, including about transportation. I think in Indonesia, especially in a bigger city, I mean, changing or transition from the fossil fuel to green energy would help. But the question is, do we have actually a structural means to do that? There are different policies to actually push people to transition to green energy, including EV. For example, incentives, if you maybe something with the tax, etc. I'm not sure. But the question about the source of energy is a very legitimate question. Because if, for example, the source of energy is not from renewable energy, then it also brings another issue. But I think because of the uncertainty that we are experiencing right now, it's a time to just be open to ideas and also think along the way what kind of structural ways to implement the effort in a more effective ways, like EV, for example. Do we have enough charging stations? The question about who can afford actually EV, electrical vehicle, because it's very expensive. And what are the steps in terms of policy needed to make sure that this is not a rush decision, nggak cuman reactive, let's say, kita harus achieve Paris Agreement, so we do anything that we can, but also think along about the steps to make sure that the effort is sustainable in the future. Pertanyaan lain, another question that I thought is interesting is that how much it will contribute. Just think about if everyone who has a fossil fuel car, diesel, benzene, change to EV, how much we can contribute to the reducing emission, with comparison of the composition of people who doesn't have car, that kind of thing, or industry, for example, that really produce a lot of carbon in their activities. But keep asking this question and also do research on them. I think that's what I wanted to push you to do as students, as researchers. I chose not to go to that field, but maybe some of you would want to be researching on this issue. And I think, again, an idea of research is also thinking about this justice issue again. It will lead to the question by Tresna as well, right? The question of who can afford this energy transition and what can we do to actually make sure that the efforts are achieving social justice in Indonesia. Maybe that's Mbak Lely dan Hanin, semoga menjawab, tapi mungkin bisa tanya expert di energy transition ya Mbak Hanin supaya lebih legitimate answer-nya.
Dan perlu dilakukan penelitian ya Mbak ya oleh mahasiswa ESL.
Kayaknya sudah ada banyak, cuman karena saya bukan expertnya, jadi mungkin teman-teman dari BRIN atau dulunya LIPI ya sudah banyak yang penelitian soal itu.
Iya, menarik itu Mbak.
Sangat menarik.
Iya, sangat menarik.
Tresna, the question about Natuna Island, Kepulauan Riau, you said it's about governance. Maybe they are not aware of it. I think they are aware. Issues about Indonesia is we're very big and we have layered of problems. We have issues of these decentralization systems that are not yet effective. We have issues of capacity. So I always, like, as a student, when I see these governance problems, like, why government didn't do anything, but they do things. And I realize that when I'm on the field, but sometimes you have to adjust with the system. I think that's the challenges of being government officials, is that sometimes they are very constrained to the structure or the system or the culture where they cannot actually break through, let's say. If you don't have money, you cannot increase capacity. If for example, if you don't have a good human resources, then you cannot do anything because things will not go in an effective way, let's say. You need the knowledge, you need the institutional knowledge, but also knowledge to apply is right. So different types of knowledge. The other important thing is, again, the political issues is very, very complicated. Like there is a prioritization of development, right? Every countries have that. So for Indonesia, because we have not unlimited budget and capacity, so they have to prioritize, they have to box things up, let's say. And that becomes a big issue when we go to the field and see, like, maybe one village is kind of like in a very poor situation, doesn't have access, facility, etc., because maybe there's just no capacity, or maybe they're not prioritized in the development plan, etc. So again, that's why I said community self-governance is an important aspect here. So even with one leader in a local community who has this ambition to change, they could change things. They could bring people or governments bring attention to them, like they have to do something about it. So for our country and many of developing countries, the combination of self-governance, so people who are governing themselves, and then the more top-down governance is the most effective one to do, let's say. You cannot only just rely on what the national or regional government told you to do, or their efforts, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's maybe it.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Annisa, because the time is over. Thank you so much, Mbak Annisa, for the sharing. And then before I close the session, I think that we have to take picture first.
Yes, okay, that's very important, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Mas Ari, yeah, just take picture. I think that you can open your camera, guys. Yeah. Yeah, like this, okay.
So finally, I see faces here.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone's open the camera? Yeah, Mas Arif.
1, 2, 3. Okay, next.
Okay, Mas Arif, finish?
Finish.
Okay. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, everyone. And then have a good day. See you later.
Thank you.
Vanessa, thank you so much.
Everyone. Makasih undangannya, Mbak
Ya,
Meli.
sama-sama, Mbak Nisa.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.